Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is Power Wash Simulator. Let's rant with Scrapper. We're doing the Lost City of Atlantis today, and I've done this one before. I've done all of them. Um, this is a huge one, so you're not going to see more than a tiny percentage of it. But basically, we're here in the Lost City of Atlantis. Everything is filthy, and we got to clean up all the muck. And there's this little object here we can get out of the way. And we're just going to start inside, and you know how I like doing straight stuff. So we'll just start inside doing the round. And as we go, we're going to rant. And today, we're going to be talking about something that actually came up in a discussion I was having with a friend of mine. Um, he linked me to a video. And after watching the video, he and I got into a debate, not really an argument. We ended up having to agree to disagree. We got into a debate about the subject. And so let me talk a little bit about that. So what the video showed, it was some kind of a skit, I think. And one issue that we both had was we weren't sure if it's meant to be satire or if it's meant to be real. But I've actually heard this stuff before and on like Reddit and D&D Beyond and stuff, and it's actually been meant to be serious. So I just want to talk about it a little bit. So in the skit there was somebody who was new to Dungeons and Dragons who was playing D&D with them, and I guess she wasn't really sure how to play her character or whatever, and um, the DM told her just to sort of do what your character would do. And so he and I got into a discussion about that, because it's what my character would do is one of the things wang rods say when they're doing stupid stuff on purpose. But this was an inexperienced player, so this wasn't somebody doing stuff on purpose to harm the game or the other players. She was just inexperienced, and that he just showed me that moment, and we were talking about it. But then he said in a later episode, they decided that to become better role players, they all needed to take an improv class. And so I then said to him, I actually hate the fact that this is what people think now. Um, and this is something very, very new, right? When I was playing role-playing games in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I don't think anyone ever would have considered the suggestion that you could become better at Champions or D&D, a better role player, whatever, by taking improv acting classes or any kind of acting classes. This is something that's new. This idea has come about, I think, almost entirely because of actual play shows on YouTube where people are playing whatever game it is, whether it's D&D or Savage Worlds or Call of Cthulhu, live in front of an audience, essentially a video audience, right? Or they're recording it and uh, they're recording it and the audience is watching the YouTube, or they're doing it on Twitch and they're interacting with the audience. And many of the people on these shows have actor training. And on the Saving Throw channel, the Savage World show that I watched, the Wildcards group, Megan Caves and Jordan Caves Callerman. Megan's one of the players, Jordan's the GM. They met in college in the drama program. They were drama majors in college, so they acted all the time in college. They had acting training, and both of them moved to California, as I understand it, with the intention of like becoming actors and getting into movies or TV or something. And then I think Jordan said at one point that uh, that was their intent, and then when they got there, it was like really hard to get an acting job, but they were able to get this gig playing role playing games online, like as a show, and they found, I guess both of them found that they liked doing that better than just learning a script and acting in front of a camera. That this was actually more fun, although of course it doesn't pay anywhere near as much, right? Jordan Pridgeon, also part of that group, not only has actor training, but at least while I was watching the show, continued to be a semi-pro or whatever you want to call it actor. He was in shows. There were several times when he had to miss an episode, a session of the Deadlands game or the ETU game because he was performing improv at some theater. So not only does he have acting training, but he actually does actual improv, right? As like for real in front of an audience, like in a theater, right? So I don't know if you want to call it professional. I don't know if he was paid for it, if it was, volunteer. I don't know. But these people are either professional or semi-professional actors with improv training, right? And this is true of, the other shows as well. They're professional actors. And so you're watching these shows with people who are professional actors, and the shows are very entertaining to watch, and the players are doing voices, and they're getting into character and interacting in character in a way that's rather different from the way most people play a role-playing game, right? And so, only because these shows in the last, say, decade have become popular, and this is what people are doing on the show, would it ever occur to anyone that improv acting might improve your D&D game? Because trust me, it never occurred to anybody in the 90s. It never occurred to anybody in the 80s. Like that and it's not because we weren't role playing. It's because they're not the same thing. And so this is where the debate he and I came up with, and it's really interesting because like I actually watch these shows. He hates them because of the whole acting component, and he feels like they're fake. And so what I said to him was, I actually really hate that people feel this way because it's like improv acting has nothing to do with playing Champions or D&D. And he said, well, it does when you're doing the, like, what Luke from the DM would call the talkie parts. And I said, no, it doesn't. And he said, well, sure it does. And I said, no, it doesn't. And we got into this discussion where I said, look, the thing is, improv acting techniques may have some skills in common with what you use to roleplay, but they're not the same thing. And there is no guarantee that learning to improv is going to make you a better role player in D&D because the two are not equivalent. It's not the same thing. And the example I gave him was, it's like saying you're going to be a better Champions player or you'll understand the Champions rules better if you take a statistics class. Yes, there's lots of statistics in a role-playing game where you're thinking of probabilities and the likelihood of something happening, but most statistics classes are going to teach you a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with Champions, like t-tests and correlation and stuff. And unless you're a game designer, where it might help to just play Champions and decide whether to throw your 10d6 fire bolt, like the statistics class is not going to help you with that. It's not going to help you understand the rules of Champions, not at all. And so, and I think similarly, if you take an acting classes, whether it's improv or regular acting, I don't think it would help because, like, you literally don't need to do any of the things you do in acting to be a role player. I role played many times without using my voice or my facial expressions on mushes or in MMOs where the character just does an emote, right? You type semicolon wave in City of Heroes and your character does the wave emote, right? What does that have to do with acting? And yet it's role playing. So he and I got into this big debate because he said role playing and acting are the same thing. And what he then argued is, like, if you talk in your character's voice, you're acting. Like, in other words, if you say my character walks into the bar and asks for a drink, you're role playing. You're just role playing. But if you say my character walks into the bar and says, "Hey Bob, set me up a couple of cold ones," and you're quoting the character, now you're acting. And I said no, because if you use that definition, then I was acting on MMOs when I was typing my character's dialogue into the chat box. But I don't think anybody would call that acting. And if anything, it's writing, right? Because you're writing the text now, not speaking it. And I don't think anybody considers writing to be acting. And I said, it's not acting to say it out loud any more than I'm writing a novel when I type my character's role play into the chat box. That's not it's not writing a short story. It's not writing in the sense of essays or narrative or anything like that. It's simply role play. You're just typing in what your character would do. And so I guess what I want to talk about today is like the difference between something like acting and role playing, and the fact that role playing and acting are not the same thing. There are some, you know, there are some techniques that you have in common, just like when you're playing a mush and you're writing out the pose of your character. There are some techniques you have in common with fiction writing, right? In terms of the grammar and the spelling and word order and how to write a vivid description. I mean, those things are similar, but you're not being a novelist when you write those out in the chat box in an MMO or in a mush, right? And similarly, you are not acting when you're role playing. I told him I can't act, but I'm a very good role player. And he said, then you're a good actor. I said, no, I'm not, right? Because I am not capable of doing things like crying on command, right? I would not be able to do that. But I can say my character cries, and and then I can do a little bit of a sobby voice. Why didn't you help me? Right? But I can't actually cry. And I would never convince anybody that I was personally upset, right? But I can roleplay that my character is upset. And so yeah, I think that this is there's a big difference between the two, and the techniques that you use for one may be related, right? So like an actor, Charlton Heston would probably do a much better job of doing cool voices and making his facial expressions look the way his character's facial expressions would look. But that doesn't mean he's a better role player than I am, because it's not about convincing me that your character's lines are being delivered realistically. That's not role playing, right? That's acting. But role playing is different, right? An actor is told, your character feels upset now. And the actor then plays the part and tries to fool the audience into thinking he or she is actually upset, right? That's what the actor is doing. But a role player isn't doing that. You're not trying to trick anybody into thinking that your character is upset. What you're doing is you're trying to analyze the situation knowing the character and figure out what the character would do in response. That's why Luke says role playing and talking are not the same thing, and that when you're in combat and you decide your character is going to attack this orc and not that orc, that's role playing, because you're looking at the situation and saying, well, what would my character do here? Right? And an actor isn't necessarily doing that, right? What their character would do was often decided by the writers. Now, in improv acting, there are no writers, and then you are deciding what your character would do. So there is certainly some of that, but still, the purpose of acting is to like convince the audience that you are feeling the emotions that you're portraying, right? And the purpose of role playing is to portray a character. You're not trying to convince anybody that you really feel these feelings. Your character is feeling the feelings. It's a very different mindset. And so what I would say, folks, is nobody needs to take improv acting lessons in order to play a role playing game. Not at all. I'm not saying that they don't help, that they might not maybe give you some like little skills to use that you could translate into your role-playing games, just like knowing some statistics might help you understand a little better what a 14 or less means versus a 12 or less in champions. Um, but it's not going to necessarily make you directly a better champions player. It's not going to make you win battles. It's not going to make you defeat the villain, right? There are some things, right? One of the rules in improv acting is that you always say yes. That is, when one of the other actors comes up with something, you don't argue about it or fight over it or resist it. You just accept that as part of the scene and go with it, right? So improv actors learn to go with what each other is doing. And that can be useful in a role playing game to help you and your friends um, not resist what each other's doing, right? And also to accept what the dice say, right? If you view the dice as just being another improv actor and you're just going along with that actor by going along with the dice, then that can be helpful. So I'm not saying that you couldn't maybe learn some skills and stuff from improv, but you don't need to learn improv in order to be a good role player. You simply don't. It like acting and role playing are not the same, and they are very different skill sets. And again, the way I know this is that I've been role playing for years, but I can't act. Okay, and um, and no, it's not just that I think I can't act, but I'd actually be a great actor because I'm a good role player. No, I can role play very convincingly, right? I remember I've had in mushes, right? And on MMOs, I have had multiple real world women who, because I was playing a female character, they were convinced I was actually a woman, right? Because I role played the female characters like actual females instead of the way I guess some men think women behave or want women to behave. I think a lot of men, usually young men, like teenagers who don't, we're just sort of, the horny teenage boys, will play a female character and they either have her act the way they think women act or they have her act the way they wish women would act. And which is basically like they're in an X-rated movie. And I'm trying to portray a realistic character. So mostly what I do is I just have the character act like a character. Like I don't even worry about what gender I'm playing most of the time, right? I don't think, oh, this is a woman, so she would act this way. Instead, I say, okay, how would Silver Phoenix react to a situation? So let me give you a great example where I was role playing, but not acting. And yet it was a critically important example. Silver Phoenix is a superhero. She was on the Homecoming server, and I was in a supergroup called the Daybreak Initiative with a lot of min-maxers. Now, these guys were role players, but they did a lot of min-maxing, and their first love seemed to be builds and min-maxing, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But this plays into the story, and I think I've told this story a couple times before. But I want to illustrate it as a point where I was role playing my character without doing any acting, really. Okay. First of all, we're on City of Heroes, so they can't hear my voice, they can't see my facial expressions. We're level 50, and we go into the level 50 zone. I might have been level like 49 and sidekicked up or something, but we're going into the level 50 zone in Dark Astoria, the rebooted Dark Astoria. And we're going to do the story arc there. And it was in character story night, so we're supposed to be role playing while we were playing the missions. And this particular mission, the story arc, starts out with breaking a villain out of jail, a member of the Malta. And you're breaking him out of jail because you need his information. He won't give the information unless you release him, and the police won't release him. So you're going against the cops. You're going to have to fight Blue Steel in the mission, who's a heroic superhero who works for the police, the Paragon PD. And you're going to be releasing this villain against the will of the state, right? Not just the police, but the town, the city, the government would not release him. And, well, Silver Phoenix is a law-abiding superhero. So as a role player, I said, guys, I don't think that my character would do this. She's not going to fight the police. And they said, well, what do you want us to do? That's the mission. Like, what else can we do? Right? And I think in the video where I talked about this, I said, well, there's an easy answer to that. If you're role playing and your character is a hero and it's what your character wouldn't do, you don't do the mission. Right? It never occurred to them not to do the mission because they wanted the badge. As a role player, right, what I said is my character not having the badge is in character because she wouldn't do this. So I didn't go on the mission. Now, it turned out after the first mission, they didn't have to fight the police anymore, and they sidekicked me along, and I joined them. I didn't get the badge for it because I didn't do the whole story arc, which annoyed me. But I was able to participate in the rest of it because it wasn't fighting the police anymore, right? So my point here is there wasn't any acting on my part, really, right? I did have my character comment a little bit, but what we actually decided was that the team knew that Silver Phoenix wouldn't be cool with this, so they didn't tell her until they didn't have to fight the police, and then they radioed her and said, "Come on along, we need your help." Right? So my character didn't actually say any dialogue, right? But as a role player, what I said is my character wouldn't do this, and I'm going to skip this mission because she wouldn't do it. That's not acting, but it is role playing, right? Because role playing is not about acting. It's about having your character behave in ways that fit the concept of the character and the scene that you're in, right? And you, again, look at people who do Ironsworn. Ironsworn's a role-playing game that a lot of people play solo. There's no acting when you're solo. I mean, yeah, some people make videos. I did with Ironsworn, and some of the people who make videos, like when Kill 10 Rats does it, he does the voices and he sort of voice acts it out. But I don't, right? I usually talk in third person. I say the character asks this question, right? The whole time you're doing that, that's role playing. It's not acting. There are dozens, maybe hundreds, probably hundreds of people who play Ironsworn or Starforged, and they journal. They don't say a word out loud. They journal. They roll the dice, they interpret what happens, and they write in their journal. That's still role-playing because they're having the character in the journal act the way the character would act. But it's not acting. It's certainly not, at least not in the way that you understand it. And nothing you learned from an acting class is going to help you write that journal, because that's not what acting is about. And so, yes, if you learn, there's stuff you could have learned in creative writing class that might help you write more interesting or florid or whatever descriptions of whatever the character is seeing, or whatever is, writing descriptions of other characters. You can make these really nice descriptions that maybe you learned how to do in your creative writing class. But the creative writing class is not going to really help you be a good Ironsworn player. To do that, you got to learn the rules of Ironsworn and understand how role-playing games work, not how writing works, right? Role-playing games are not creative writing, and creative writing is not role-playing games. And role-playing games and acting are not the same either. And so, yeah, I just want to sort of weigh in on this whole idea that, because I've heard it expressed, it wasn't just on this show, which again may have been satire. It wasn't just expressed on this show. I've seen it expressed on D&D Beyond and on Reddit and so on, that if you want to be a better role player, as in doing the social parts of the game, take some improv acting classes. And I just don't think that that's, not only is it not necessary, I think it's false. Like I said, there are some improv techniques that can maybe help you with the social talky parts of the game, especially just accepting whatever other people are doing. However, much of that, if you watch, like, say, Megan Caves and Jordan Callerman and Jordan Pridgeon, who have all of that training on the wildcard show, and you say, see how great they are at it. Yes, but remember, they've been doing it for years. They're not new to acting. They majored in it in college, so they had 4 years, at least Jordan Callerman and Megan do, before they graduated, and they're not college age anymore, right? They I think they're all like in their 30s, and they've been acting since, right, on the stage, like Jordan Pridgeon and so forth. So these are polished actors who have experience at improv. And so the improvisational techniques that they're using come second nature to them. They don't have to stop and figure it out. Whereas if you just had one improv acting class, it's not going to really make it second nature to you. You'd have to do it for years, the way Megan Caves and Jordan Pridgeon and Jordan Callerman have done it. And um, so just taking a couple improv classes isn't going to do anything for you. It'll introduce you to the ideas, but it's not going to make them second nature, right? And like, you can train yourself just as easily to accept what other people do by just trying to consciously do that for a while. And I mean, my group does it all the time. None of them have improv acting training, but when one of them gets an idea, we all kind of, or when I get an idea, we all just kind of go with it. All you have to do is trust that the other person is going to come up with something cool and fun, and you're good to go. So I guess what I want to say here is, for those of you who maybe feel intimidated by portraying your character, you shouldn't feel intimidated, and you definitely shouldn't feel like you need to have some kind of acting training in order to do a role-playing game. Right? I've never had any acting training, and I've been role-playing most of my life. And role-playing well enough that on mushes in a text medium, on MMOs in a text medium, I've been able to convince other people that I was someone totally different from myself, right? To the point where actually somebody who I assume, I think, was a male player had a crush on my character in Star Wars Galaxies, who was a female Twi'lek, right? And it was just because of how I portrayed her. He just thought she was really sweet and cute, which is how I portrayed her. And because she was kind of innocent and everything, and she liked cute animals like Chubas and Ewoks. And like, at one point when the guild, this was I met this guy before I was in my guild, but at one point my guild, many of whom were covert or overt Imperials, the first guild I was in, they went to Endor, and they got wiped out by a bunch of Ewoks. And so the one guy who thought this was hilarious, he was part of the group. When they were all laid there dead, and he said, "Don't anybody clone yet. Just wait." And he positioned his camera somehow, and he got this screenshot of all the Ewoks sort of dancing on the dead bodies of the guildmates. There were like 8 guildmates. And in those days, the name was hovering over the character, so it said corpse of this one and corpse of that one. And the Ewok leader was like doing a dance. And he took this screenshot and he posted it with an LOL on it. And then the guild was like, okay, we have to organize a guild expedition to go get revenge. And I said, and so then they went and did it, right? And then they posted in the same thread another image of the dead Ewoks, and they were dancing on the dead Ewok bodies, and they're like, revenge. And I posted to the forum, right, as the player, and said, please don't tell my character. I said, don't tell my character that you did this unless you want her to cry and be really upset. I thought it was hilarious as a player, but my character had been to Endor, and she had been to the Ewoks, and they don't attack you if you're neutral, or if you're rebel. They only attack you if you're an Imperial. So she had, like, a couple of other entertainers and I had gone to the Ewok base, and on our speeder bikes, and we had, like, performed for the Ewoks just for fun, right? We thought it was cool. and a couple of our friends who weren't entertainers had come, and we were all in neutrals. I think one or two was covert rebels, and the others were all neutrals. The Ewoks left us alone, and we went and sat in the Ewok like uh, whatever you want to call it, their tribal moot or whatever, and we uh, we performed for them. And my character thought Ewoks were cute. She liked Ewoks because they were nice to her, right? They weren't they didn't mind her because she wasn't a stormtrooper. She wasn't an Empire. They don't like the Empire, right? Obviously, right? From anybody who's seen Return of the Jedi, the Ewoks really don't like the Empire, and so my character loved Ewoks and thought they were cute. That's role playing, right? I didn't say any dialogue, but I told them if you don't want my character to cry, right? And if they had told her that they killed all the Ewoks, I would have had her cry and probably refuse to dance and go into a corner and like curl up into a ball and be very upset because that's what she would do. Now I played another character and I said don't tell the other one because she'll beat you up. Right? So my other character was a Terrace Kazi artist slash creature handler and she was a covert rebel. Right? So if she found out that people hurt allies of the rebellion, she would have something to say about it, right? She would have not taken it lightly, but she wouldn't have curled up into a ball and cried. She would have had words and probably pulled out her, whatever they were, vibro knucklers, and said, we're going to throw down right here and right now because you guys killed those Ewoks. Right? So I said, don't tell either one of my characters you did this, guys, because they're not going to like it, and one of them might have some a violent response, and they didn't tell my characters because they didn't want to have a fight in the middle of the guild hall. We were trying to keep the guild cohesive, even though it was there were some rebels and some Imperials and a bunch of neutrals in the guild, and eventually it didn't work, and the guild did break up because the covert Imperials wanted to go over to do a bunch of PvP. And the neutrals and the rebels, of course, couldn't be in an overt Imperial guild. I think you actually couldn't be. And so I don't know. The neutrals might have been able to be, but one of the rebels was like, "So what? You're just gonna like kick us out?" And there was she made a very pointed comment, and all of a sudden we got this alert that like half the guild had quit, and it was all the people who wanted to go overt Imperial. So it was really kind of sad. In the end, most of us neutrals and the covert rebels broke off and created our own roleplay guild. But in the meantime, for guild cohesion, I said, this is how my character will act if you don't want her to act this way. Don't tell her this, right? But because she was this soft-hearted Twi'lek, she was very pretty. Like I purposely made a sexy Twi'lek dancer to be a Twi'lek dancer, right? So she was hot, at least as hot as a character could be in a 2003 game, and she wore attractive clothing. I was good friends with a dancer slash tailor who made my whole wardrobe, and she was also always very good at coming up with the right colors to match the bright blue. So if you see the blue on this nozzle here behind the yellow and the white, that's like the color my character's skin was. So certain colors of clothing clashed with her skin, and the tailor was really good at coming up with clothing that worked. And the character was like the super clothes horse, and she was always trying to improve her wardrobe and everything. My other character didn't care what she looked like. She just wore like a jacket and like utility pants, and went around beating up bad guys and mostly animals and creatures and pirates and stuff, and taming animals, right? She had her own pet rancor and stuff, and so and his name was Grumpy, and one of the jokes was he's less grumpy than she is. Or they are totally different characters played by the same player. Most, I think, of the guild knew that I was playing the same characters, but strangers didn't, and there were male players who, because my dancer was pretty and sweet and kind and helpful and friendly and everything, thought that that I was that person. And not to say that I'm not a friendly person, but I don't act like she did in real life. I was just role playing, but I wasn't acting, right? It was all done in text with like maybe some visual emotes from the character because Star Wars Galaxies had some really good motion captured emotes. So like if you typed slash laugh, the character would actually belly laugh or whatever. If you typed slash ROFL, the character would actually get onto the floor and roll around laughing, actually roll on the floor laughing, which is pretty cool. Um, so there were some animations that went with it, but I wasn't doing the animations, right? And so what I'm saying is you can be a good role player without being a good actor. And you can probably be a really good actor and not a good role player, right? They're not the same skill set. There are similarities to it. Just like when I was typing out role playing in Mush, there were similarities to creative writing, but they're not the same thing. And just because, I don't know, just because um, Robert Jordan was a really good writer of fantasy for like the Eye of the World and all that doesn't mean that if he had played D&D, he would have been a great D&D player. They're just not the same skill set. And so that means that when you're playing these games, you don't need to be a writer to write a D&D module or a champion scenario. And you don't need to try and follow the rules of playwriting to come up with an adventure. And you don't need to be an actor or have any improv training in order to be a good role player. Thousands and thousands of people aren't and are good role players. And my point here is the idea of being an improv actor or taking improv to do role play, like to play a game like Dungeons and Dragons or Champions, I don't think it ever occurred to anyone until these shows started popping up whose players are actors. And now what's happening is people don't want to just play D&D or Savage Worlds. They say, I want to play Savage Worlds the way Jordan Callerman and Megan Caves and Jordan Pridgeon played it. But that's not how everybody plays Savage Worlds. In fact, it's how hardly anybody plays Savage Worlds. Instead, most people play it using third-person narration. They don't do voice acting. They don't dress up in costume the way Megan and Jordan and Dom and those guys did. They just talk it out, theater of the mind, and role play it, right? You can say, my character yells in anger and curses you out, curses your character out. And that is role playing, but it's not acting. It's also not acting to say, my character says, bleep, bleep, you bleep and bleep. I'm going to draw on you and fire. That's dialogue. But dialogue is not acting. It's just role play. So I guess we'll leave it there, folks. Again, you don't have to be an actor to role play. And role playing your dialogue does not make you an actor, and it does not mean you're acting. So you don't need to take acting classes. You don't need to take improv lessons. You don't need any of that. You want to be a good D&D player? Just play more D&D. You'll get it, right? The newest player in our group, we've been playing 3 years now. She's a much better player than she was 3 years ago, right? Is she as good as some of the people who've been playing for decades? Not yet, right? But she doesn't have to be, right? All she has to do is play her character and have fun. She's fun to have in the game, and she role plays just fine. And she gets the game system maybe better than they do because she's seen a lot of the wild cards show, and so she understands Savage Worlds rules a little better than the rest of the group. And she portrays her character perfectly fine. Does she do the dialogue and stuff? Generally, no, but that's okay. You don't have to do that to be a good role player. All you got to do is think what your character would do and have the character do that. So I think we'll leave it there. That's enough for today. Until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been Scrapperlock Rants with Power Wash Simulator.